You live in a world where controlling when you have children is something a doctor prescribes, something a lab developed, something manufactured, tested, and approved. You probably assume this is a modern problem, something the 20th century solved. Now, picture a woman in ancient Egypt. No prescription, no pharmacy, no lab, and a very specific plant she knew to use for a very specific purpose. She knew what it did. Her mother knew, her grandmother before that. Ancient humans didn't wait for modern science to figure this out. They spent 10,000 years figuring it out themselves. And some of what they figured out turned out to be pharmacologically correct. So, what did they actually know, and how did they know it? First, let's talk about why this mattered. Childbirth in the ancient world was genuinely dangerous, not in a theoretical way, in a this could end you way. More pregnancies meant more risk. And in a hunter-gatherer group, too many young children who couldn't walk fast enough was not just a personal problem. It was a survival problem, a resource problem, a group problem. And the knowledge of what to do about it was not hidden. It was documented. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical documents in the world, dating to roughly 1550 BCE in Egypt, contains explicit gynecological treatments. A Greek physician named Cyranus of Ephesus, writing in the 1st century CE, described multiple approaches to fertility management, distinguished their effectiveness, and ranked them by safety. This wasn't secret. It wasn't shameful. It wasn't even rare. It was documented medical practice. So how did ancient humans, with no chemistry, no biology, no framework for understanding what a hormone even was, figure out which plants did what? The answer is the oldest form of science humans ever practiced. They paid attention. They tried things. They told each other what worked. And they did it for thousands of years. Across ancient medical traditions on multiple continents, a category of herbs was specifically documented for regulating and managing the menstrual cycle. They had a name for this category: emmenagogues, substances that stimulate or regulate menstrual flow. Some of the most widely documented: pennyroyal, wild carrot seed, artemisia, pomegranate rind. Modern pharmacological research has confirmed that several of these contain compounds with genuine physiological effects. Pennyroyal contains pulegon, a compound with documented effects on reproductive tissue. Wild carrot seeds have been studied for compounds that interfere with progesterone synthesis. These were not random folk remedies. These were empirically identified active botanical compounds, used for thousands of years, before anyone had language for what a compound was. The Greek physician Cyranus wrote them down. Medieval European herbalists wrote them down. Chinese medical lineages wrote them down. The same plants, on opposite sides of the world, arrived at independently, through thousands of years of women paying attention and reporting back. They didn't have chemistry. They had observation. And 10,000 years of trial and error. Silphium, a plant from the ancient city-state of Cyrene, on the coast of what is now Libya. Ancient Greek and Roman sources describe it consistently as extraordinarily effective for fertility management. It appeared on Cyrene's coins. Julius Caesar reportedly stored it in the treasury alongside gold. It was one of the most valuable traded commodities in the entire Mediterranean world. And it was so heavily harvested, so in demand across the ancient world, that by the 1st century CE, it was essentially extinct. The last known specimen was reportedly sent as a curiosity to Emperor Nero, not as medicine, as a rarity, as something nobody alive had ever actually seen. Modern botanists have been unable to identify it with certainty. Some researchers believe it may have been a species of giant fennel, a genus that contains compounds with documented effects on reproductive hormones. But we don't know, because the most effective plant in the ancient world was consumed into extinction by its own demand. We over-farmed it. We lost it. We can't get it back. And whatever compound made it work went with it. The practical knowledge of which plants did what was not written in any medical text for ordinary readers. The medical texts that survived were written by male physicians for educated readers in formal language. The actual knowledge, which preparation, which timing, which dose, lived somewhere else. Mother to daughter, midwife to apprentice, neighbor to neighbor, passed mouth to ear, generation to generation, in the only tradition that had access to the actual results. This is why the same plants appear across completely unconnected cultures, not because knowledge traveled between them, because women in Egypt and women in Greece and women in medieval Europe all had access to the same thing: nature, time, and each other. The most sophisticated pharmacological knowledge of the ancient world wasn't in libraries. It was in conversations that nobody recorded, because nobody thought to ask. Here's the part that changes the whole story. When pharmaceutical researchers in the 20th century were developing hormonal contraception, they were working with compounds derived from plants, specifically from the Mexican wild yam, a plant whose traditional use in Mexican indigenous medicine already included fertility management. The pharmaceutical breakthrough of the 20th century was not the discovery that plants can affect reproductive hormones. Ancient women had already established that empirically, across multiple continents, over thousands of years. What was modern was understanding the mechanism, naming the molecule, being able to synthesize it at scale. The knowledge that plant compounds affect fertility is ancient. What is modern is knowing why. You're back at that pharmacy counter. The prescription, the carefully labeled box, the product of decades of clinical trials and pharmaceutical research. But now you know what it's built on. The understanding that plant compounds affect fertility didn't begin in a lab. It began with a woman in ancient Egypt who tried something, watched what happened, and told someone she trusted. It was passed forward through 10,000 years of women watching, testing, remembering, and talking. Without laboratories, without chemistry, without any of the language we now use to explain what they already understood. We gave the knowledge a name. We gave it a pill and a prescription. But the knowledge itself, it was never ours to invent. There was never a pharmacy. There was never a lab. There was only the knowledge women passed from mother to daughter across 10,000 years. And it worked well enough that modern science is still finding out exactly why.